At this point, we have our first few brackets and hangers on hand, and we know the first couple things that we want to hang and where we want to hang them. So now what I'm going to do is hang those first few items and then come back and see what is left to hang. For the wheels and tires, you can buy a metal bracket that will wall hang on Amazon for $40 to $50, and that does pretty well. But I already have a bunch of spare wood that was kicking around from my previous projects. This is about $10 worth of wood. I'll do a separate video on how I'm making a tire hanger out of that. The link for that video will be in the description below. The screws we're going to be using to hanging most things are these 1¼ drywall screws. If you think about how a drywall screw works, it goes through a sheet of drywall and then latches it onto a wooden stud that's in the wall behind it. Knowing that they can do that and they support the weight of the drywall fairly well, these will be good enough for most applications of what we're doing because 1, we're going into wood, and 2, we're not supporting a substantial amount of weight. For the things like the tire hanger that we're going to be making, that's a little more heavy and it's got a thicker wood that we're going to have to go through more length, those are going to get uprated screws because we know they're going to have more weight to support. I should also note I could have just gone to the big bucket of spare screws I had. I moved most of them over into here, but the issue is most of them are different sizes or weren't heavy duty enough to support the amount of weight that I'm going to have. So from the perspectives of both having the screws actually match each other and from the perspective of knowing confidently that it's going to hold the weight that we're going to have on it, going with the drywall screws was the right choice. You've also probably noticed at this point that I've changed gloves from the other ones. What you can see, especially on these pieces of wood over here, is I had so much grease and grime in the other gloves that they were starting to make things messy as I was picking them up. For that reason, I've gone with a new fresh set of gloves. That way I don't have to worry about marking up the walls and all the items that I'm going to be hanging.
The first item we're hanging is the garden tool holder, and it's held up by 3 simple screws. This tool hanger is about 3 feet long, give or take, and most people don't notice a height difference from one end to the other of about 1/4 to 1/2 inch over this length. For that reason, I'm not using a level to hang this. The weed whacker stand needs to be over the outlet so that way the weed whacker can charge when it's not in use and it's being placed accordingly. The pallet breaker was too heavy for the garden tool hanger, so I'm using the 2 large nails from earlier to hang it across the bottom. Due to the size of these nails, I had to pre-drill holes because they were too large to just hit in with a hammer. And let's hang the bike stand for good measure.
At this point, the first wave of garden tools is hung up. I also had my motorcycle rear stand hung up. For the most part, where I'm going to be working on the motorcycle is here. So it just makes sense to either have it here, that wall, or over here on this side. But because that's where the bench is and I might put some overhead shelves or cabinets in, putting it on that wall just isn't really feasible. Another thing to note is I did slightly overlap the rear stand with this garage tool hanger. Some people really don't like the overlap of things. I think it's fine visually. It's not a huge deal to me. It really allows you to utilize a lot more of the space. If you have no overlap whatsoever, nothing would go up into the center of this, and you'd have a lot of unutilized space that you could otherwise hang things in. From both a logistics standpoint and a making use of as much space as possible standpoint, putting it here just makes sense for me. Shifting focus for a second, I gotta see what else I have from a gardening and lawn care standpoint because I'd like this to be a catch-all gardening and lawn care station. What I do have is some gardening fence, both the metal and the plastic kind. Additionally, what I have is the fencing stakes that support them. Beyond the fencing supplies, the only other thing I really have is the garden hose itself, but for the most part, that's gonna be hung outside during the year and I'm just gonna bring it in for the winter. That being said, it only has to be inside during the winter, which means it doesn't even necessarily need to be in the garage. For that reason, I'm not gonna worry about hanging this yet because I also have the option to hang it elsewhere if needed at a later time. So looking at these fencing supplies, if I wasn't to hang those right there, I'd pretty much not be able to utilize that space anyway else. Now what I'm gonna do is put those hang-alls above the top window and then here over the gardening tools as well, and make sure that when these go up there, it makes sense visually.
The hang-alls go up with 4 screws each, and as you can see, I had to adjust the level of the second one slightly so I can make it level across the distance of the 2. The window frame here is the point of reference, so it's more important to line up with the window frame than it is to line up parallel with the ground.
At this point, the first wall is just about finished, but it's becoming more and more apparent that I just have too much stuff in my way. I just really need to free up some real estate because this place is a complete disaster right now.
Once again, I don't think I can stress this enough. Get everything you possibly can out of the space as early as you can in the project, or you'll be doing this like me.
At this point, that wall is just about finished. All the materials that were in the way of where I wanted to hang the tire rack have now been moved out of the way temporarily, and this is the tire rack itself that is now finished. As we discussed before, this is going to get hung between those 2 windows. To hang it, I will be using these low-profile cabinet screws, and that way I know it'll fully support the weight. I think I'd be more worried about one of these falling apart than those screws actually failing on the wall, but in either case, I would rather have too many screws and know it's going to stay up rather than risking it fall on the Mustang, which is normally going to be parked in here once this is completed. Or, maybe like a Dodge Viper if I ever stop being poor. That said, let's get to it.
Because this is going to be centered between the two windows, I'm marking on the wall where the center point is, and then I'm taking the rack off of the wall and marking where the center point is on that and getting the screws started, so that way I can just screw it in directly once it's back up on the wall. Conveniently, there's already a stud here exactly along the center line, so I'm already supporting it in the correct place. A few screws later and I'm ready to put the wheels up on the rack.
Now the tire and wheel rack is up on the wall. I did go with the darker color stain with it just because I know that a darker stain would cover up more of the discoloration from the tires. I also want to mention that even with these are just 16-inch alloys and they're fairly lightweight. These two wooden dowel crossbars, you do see a little bit of deflection going across. What I recommend is if you have a heavier set of tires or wheels, get another of those 45 cuts and then do another one of these sidebars that comes straight out. That way the center is just a little more supported. Now the tires are up and out of the way though. That actually cleared up a good bit of space. Most of the things that I have that are very space consuming are loose and still out because I never really had a chance to put it away because I had no place to put it. The next step to really getting this all buttoned up is just sorting what I have left, deciding what the different categories of parts and pieces and tools that I have are, and then storing those together. Here is the heaping mound of stuff between the basement that was left over from the previous owner of the house and the garage. It is a very good thing Sam loves me, otherwise she would probably murder me probably later tonight in my sleep. There's really no good way to organize things without just pulling it all apart and then separating it into categories, so I'm not going to show me picking through all this stuff, but it's probably going to take me about 7 years. So yeah,